Yeah, but Sean's name was there, so I don't quite know why it says I'm the only.
Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay. My computer's acting funny. I don't know what the heck it's.
Oh, okay, that's
I
probably.
can hear you.
Okay, good. Well, as long as you
I don't see anything.
You don't see anything?
No.
Is the little camera icon down the bottom of the screen open?
Well, I see a screen, like a black screen that has your name on it, but it's black with your name on it, so.
Okay. So down at the bottom of there, if you hover your cursor, there should be a microphone, like a telephone symbol, a camera symbol, and then
It says share webcam, but I think that's me sharing my webcam, right?
No, go ahead, do that and see what happens,
Okay.
just in case. I wonder, let me see. Because if you can hear me, my audio and my video is going through my webcam. Let me have a look up here. Do I have to unclick something?
Okay. Now it just shows black screen of me, so I don't know what that means. Connection failed. Oh, wait, now I can see it.
Yay!
Yes, you're there now.
Okay, and you can see the
I see the
PowerPoint.
whiteboard.
Okay, so there's my camera, and can you see the PowerPoint? I'm sharing my screen.
Not yet.
Okay, well, I'm recording this for YouTube as well. I'll start recording it in the big blue button, but I'm also recording it for YouTube, so
Okay.
hopefully one or the other will work. Okay, we've been waiting for Sierra, but she's not here yet, so I'm going to go ahead and turn the light off and get going. And as always, yell if you've got any questions. Sean, I saw that you had sent me an email that you had loaded a paper, so I will try to get to that in the next couple of days and get that back with feedback for you.
That sounds good. Appreciate that.
Okay. All right, so last week was some more detailed information on qualitative. This week I get back into my comfort zone with quantitative. All right, so just a reminder that if we're doing a quantitative study and we're collecting our data, then we are going to be collecting data that is numerical. So something like speed or strength or girth measurements or motor skill competency, okay? If we're collecting a qualitative set of data, that data is going to be along verbal lines, right? So it's going to be interviews, for example. All right, so we talked last week about the different kinds of interviews that could occur. So where in a qualitative paper they really kind of jump in and organize the study as they go along, right? And then they have to do tons and tons of work once they've got the data, the other end of the study. In a quantitative study, we do most of our work at the beginning, setting it up so that the data is going to be as valid as possible, right? So we want to have as much control over everything that's going on as we can. And in a qualitative study, they really don't control for very much. They just go with the flow and see what happens, right? So we want to control for our participants. Who are our participant pool going to be, right? Remember that Dr. Liu said, you know, in a qualitative, they can have just a couple of people, and sometimes you have this snowball effect where you just have one person, and then that one person tells you someone else that they think would want to talk to you, and then that person tells you something, right? We would never do anything like that because we want control, okay? We also want to control for the environment as much as possible, which is one of the things that makes it really fun now, more and more as we get more and more applied. It becomes harder to control for the environment if we're collecting data outside, right? So you have to make sure that you take very good field notes about what was the day like today. Because if then you start looking at the data and the data looks a bit kaplooey, you can go back to your field notes and go, oh, that day it was a 40-degree wind. Shocker in Portales, right? We also have to control the task so that the task remains consistent, right? And that means that really without trying, there are going to be limitations that we can't control for, okay? And it's important that we own up to those. So very often at the end of a discussion piece in a published article, there might be a subheading or there might just be another paragraph that says the limitations for this study were, and they tell you all the things they weren't able to do. And then it's up to you to decide, well, does that mean this data is a little more questionable than I thought it was? Or are the limitations such that I still trust this data to be usable, right? So we're typically looking for either a prediction or a cause and effect relationship. So if I do training program A, do I get better results than if I do training program B? Okay. And then I can't remember if I've discussed within and between subjects designs. Have I done that with you guys? I lose track. So much stuff going on. Okay. So if we have group A and it's got 10 people in it, right? And we have group B has maybe 11 people in it, all right? So if we're doing a between subjects design, then what we will do is calculate the mean for group A and the mean for group B, and if it's a between subjects design, we're going to compare mean A versus B. All right? So we want to know if whatever we did with one of these groups could be a control group, and we only do something with one group. Or we could be doing two different interventions, one with one group and one with another group. Or more groups, right? So when we do a between subjects design, we're looking at, did one or other intervention, or did the intervention versus the control have a bigger effect? Does that make sense? Now, if we do a within subjects design, we can also do a between subjects design if we manipulate the statistical analysis. But But when we do a within subjects design, we're also going to look at pre-post for group A and pre-post for group B. So a within subjects design is going to be pre-post, because what we're interested in here is where did person number one start? And given intervention A, where did person number one finish? And so we're looking at the impact on individual people of the intervention or the controls rather than the overall picture. And again, it depends on the question that you're asking, whether within subjects is of interest to you at that time. Right? If you're starting off on a research line, maybe the first thing you want to know is, does intervention A work overall? Before you start digging into, okay, let's do it again, and now let's start looking at individual differences. All right. So I said we had to control for our population, and we can do that in several different ways. It's really a great research if you're able to state that you had random sampling. Right? Because if I've got random sampling, that means that whatever I find out, I can apply to any kind of population within reason. Right? Because if my sample is truly random, I'm going to have men, I'm going to have women, I'm going to have old people, I'm going to have young people, I'm going to have black people, I'm going to have green people, right? I'm going to have athletes, I'm going to have disabled people, right? The whole shebang. So the sample has to be very big and truly random. That doesn't happen very much in movement quantitative studies because it's just too difficult to organize. Right? Another option you can do is take a large sample and then say, I'm going to use everybody over the age of 30. Right? That would be purposive. Another option is systematic. So in this example, say you sit at the door of the club to the student building and you literally ask every 10th person who walks through the door if they would be in your study. I would be way too embarrassed to do that. So I'm not going to do that one. But it is an option, right? And then the most typical that we see is a volunteer scenario, whether that's, so if I'm working with children who are too young to sign a consent form, then we have to have the children's consent, but we also have to have the parents' consent. But even with the 2- and 3-year-olds, right, I take them out and I say, should we play? Can I take you want to be a film star today? Can I take some film of you running really fast? If they say no, right? It doesn't matter if they're two. If they say no, the answer is no. Even if their mum and dad said yes, they're not the ones being filmed, right? So it has to be truly volunteer, which is something you have to be careful of with athletes, right? You cannot ask for volunteers if the coach is in the room. The coach can't know who did and did not volunteer, right? So you have to have some kind of coding system on your data, because there can't be any punitive comeback because someone chose not to be in the study. Okay? Often it's a convenient sample as well as being a volunteer. So, for example, at the childcare centre, I'm going to ask everybody that's there because there's only 16 kids in a classroom, right? So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that all 16 say yes and all 16 sets of guardians say yes. That's my option, right? So that's a convenience sample. So we see this a lot in motor, in exercise science type studies, because it is literally convenient, right? You just ask all your students, anybody, if you want to be in this study, sign this piece of paper, leave it at the front of the room when you leave, right? But the trouble with this one is that even if the sample is quite large, it's relatively homogeneous. And that means that I can't then transfer those results to another population, right? So if I do a study on the women's soccer team at Eastern, and the majority of the team volunteered to be in the study, that's great, but it's a convenience sample. So does that mean I can assume that the results I have also are relevant to a high school team in Alaska, or the women's Olympic team, right? They may be transferable, but I can't make that assumption because it's a convenience or a volunteer sample. The only way I can generalize the results honestly is if I've got this true random sample, which, as I said, you don't see very often in exercise science papers. Any questions? You okay, Sean? Can you still hear me?
Yes, I'm good.
Oh, good. Okay.
I'm trying to follow along on your PowerPoint at the same time.
Okay. All right. That'll work. So, here's where we like to make things a little tricky just for fun. The random assignment is not the same as random sampling. Why we have to use the same word for two totally different concepts, I do not know, but we do. Okay? So random assignment is what happens after we've found our population. Okay? So if I am going to split them into, let's say we're going to have 3 groups. We're going to have a control group, we're going to have group A and group B. Okay? We can't just take the first group of people and put them in the control, and the next group of people and put them in group A and leave the remainder for group B. Particularly I think, if we're doing something that is physiology-based. Because physiology is so different amongst individuals, and your physiology can make a huge difference to a fitness type assessment, right? So what we have to do is randomly split this big group up into 3. And we can, there are computer software programs that will do that for you. You can literally use a coin and just flip a coin. You can put everybody's name in a hat and pull bits of paper out and put them into group 1, group 2, group 3. It doesn't matter as long as there's no control over it, right? Then another thing we can do, particularly if it's a training program type thing, is we call it matched pairs. So again, let's say we have individual 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And we're just going to have 2 groups, group 1 and group 2. Okay? So we run the pre-test. So for ease of argument, let's say we're going to do a strength intervention, right? We run the pre-test, and so we have a 1 RM on a particular lift for all these individuals. Okay? We take the top 2 1 RMs. So we're just going to say, for convenience, that that's number 1 and 2. And we put number 1 into 1, and we put number 2 into 2. And they're relatively close on their 1 RM, if not the same, for this lift. Okay? Then we take the next 2 and we randomize them, we flip a coin. So number 4 may end up in group 1 and number 3 may end up in group 2. Then we take the next 2, so we rank them on the pre-test, right? We take the next 2, we flip the coin, number 5 ends up in group 1, number 6 ends up in group 2. We take the 2 weakest people on their 1 RM, we flip a coin, number 7 ends up in group 1, number 8 ends up in group 2. So this way, we have some control over the fact that we started out with a group of people that were all different strengths to begin with. And then we do whatever our training program is going to be, right? And then we do our post-test. Then you can decide whether to do a between subjects or within subjects or both. And we can genuinely, honestly say that intervention 1 or intervention 2, or the intervention versus the control, really made a difference. So this sort of language is some of the key points that you want to start looking for. If you recognize the language, if you see we randomly assigned our participants to group A or group B, or we ran a test on X, and then we ranked our participants and we match-paired them in. That's an important thing to make a note of if you've got enough words, because when I look at the purpose and I look at the statistics and I look at the conclusion, if I don't know that that group of people were matched, then the conclusion could be like, how the heck can they tell this, right? They don't know. whether intervention number 1 was better because they didn't match their participants. So it's a key point to try to fit in there if it's there in the article, because it tells the reader, if the reader is knowledgeable, it tells the reader that, okay, now I understand why they think that Group A were better than Group B. Does that make sense? Because if you just randomize it without matching it, you might end up with the top 4 strongest people in Group 1 and the weakest 4 people in Group 2. I mean, statistically it would be unlikely, but it could happen. Right? Does that make sense? So again, I know that most of you are not going to be running studies, so it's not that you need to understand this as a methodology, but you want to start being able to recognize this language when you are reading a quantitative paper. Okay? Because that makes you a critical reader. Because if they do say, oh well, intervention 1 was better than intervention 2, but they never told you that they matched those pairs, then maybe they're talking a load of nonsense. Just because you're not a published author doesn't mean you can't recognize something that should not have been published. Right? Mistakes happen. Editors are very busy and not paid for their work. So sometimes they miss things, right? Okay, I know I went over this right at the beginning of term, but everyone was very busy and stressed and kind of getting into the semester, so let's have another look quickly. Again, the language, the verbiage that you're going to see around the variables in a quantitative paper. So the dependent variable, the DV, is the thing that I'm interested in. So if it's a strength program, then the thing I'm interested in is, do the athletes get stronger? That would be my DV, strength, or change in strength, I guess. Right? The independent variable, or IV, is the thing that we're manipulating as the researcher. Okay? So, which training program are we doing? So maybe more than one level. Oh wait, let me back up a minute. So, when you are creating your question, right, remember that it's important to find the question that is interesting, and then we decide whether or not we want to collect that data as a quantitative study or a qualitative study. So don't go into your question saying, oh, I want to do a qualitative study. That's not the right way about it. Find the question that's of interest first. Okay? Now, if it's a quantitative study, and I know a couple of you have sent me draft purposes, and I wrote back and said, well, but you have to pick one of these, right? Because the more variables you have, the more complicated the question and ergo the study would become. So as a master's student, we only want to see one dependent variable, and for most of you, one independent variable. Every now and then, if you can make a really good argument to me, I'll let you have 2 independent variables. But at the master's level, you really don't want to make it more complicated than that. Now, more than one level. This is a mistake that I see quite a bit, okay? And it's just a slight misunderstanding of the concept of an independent variable, all right? So, let's stick with our strength training, all right? And remember that we've got a control group and a training A and a training B. Okay? So, my dependent variable is going to be change in strength. Because that's the thing I'm really keen to find out. Can I make my athletes stronger? What's the most efficient way to make them stronger? Right? My independent variable, here's where the mistake sometimes occurs. I get students say, well, I have two independent variables, training A and training B. But you don't, right? Your independent variable is the training program. It just so happens in this example that you have two levels of training program, A and B. But you only have one independent variable. There's only one thing you're manipulating. You just have two options of it. Does that make sense? And these are, again, these are things you should be able to identify. You don't necessarily have to list them in a summary, because if it's a good purpose statement, you will be able to tell what the DV is and what the independent variable is from the way the purpose statement is worded. So you want to understand the variables, but A, you wouldn't really put those in a summary, and B, you might find that the authors don't actually name them as dependent and independent variables until you get to the analysis and the results. Okay? But as the person doing the reading, you want to be able to identify these if it's a quantitative study. And you know what I had to do, and I did it later rather than sooner, which was not very smart of me in grad school. You might want to write yourself a little card that has dependent variable on one side with the definition and independent variable on the other side with the definition. Because maybe I'm just not very smart, which is true. It took me forever to read the paper and work. I would get these two muddled up all the time. I never could, I don't know why, because now it just seems so obvious. But it must have taken me 2 years. It was into the first year of my PhD after my master's, before I got these straight in here. I would get them muddled up all the time. And then I was like, why is this so hard? I'm just going to have this card, and it's going to be in my pencil case. And when I read a paper and I'm highlighting, I'm going to have the card right there so that I can identify the correct dependent and independent variables. Right? I don't know why my brain had so much trouble with that. But that's just a little tip in case you're having the same problems. Okay? Okay, last little bit. that icky design thing, and let me tell you, I found a goodie in our APA number 7. We even put stickies on it. If you go to page 84, there's actually a little section on research design. And then on page 91, there's another little bit that has some verbiage that might help you out, which I never found before. So there we go. So the repeated measures one we talked about. You want to look, if they say it's we're collecting pre-post data, that's the plan ahead of time for how they are going to collect their data. So in that research design methods box, that's what you're looking for. Ahead of time, what was the plan? So even in a qualitative study, ahead of time, even though they don't plan anything else, they have to know whether they're going to be doing interview data or video data or whatever, right? So that would be the plan. So in a quantitative paper, we spoke about repeated measures is the fancy term for a pre-post, because you use a repeated measures analysis of variance to analyze that data, okay? You could also see things like independent groups, crossover design, right? And again, it's not so much that you would typically report this, but it's something you want to start being able to recognize as you're reading a paper. And the more papers you read, the easier it becomes. One of the things you might see is, and it's a bit of a cheat in my view, but I had very rigorous professors. You might see someone report that they are writing up a pilot study, okay? So a pilot study is when you do a mini study ahead of doing the real thing. And there are several reasons why you might do that. If the data collection is going to be very, very expensive, then we might want to check ahead of time that our methodology, that the plan is going to work. Because otherwise, if we spend $3,000 collecting data and then we analyze it and it all goes skewy, and then you look back and go, oh my God, why did I do that? That was stupid. You're not gonna, that's gonna be a little sad, right? So sometimes we're gonna run a pilot study just to check, do I have my design really watertight before I do the main thing, right? And that, I think, is all I have for you. All right, so again, it's not, don't start panicking that, oh my God, I have to collect this data, or I've got to do it. You haven't. This is some tips on what you might do if you wanted to collect the data. But it's also more about learning the language so that when you're reading these research papers in whatever class you're in, they become easier and easier to read. Because there is a formal language around research. It's less formal in a qualitative paper than it is in a quantitative paper. The new edition of APA now allows you to talk in the first person, which you were never allowed to do. At least not in a quantitative study. It was always third person. But it's still very formal speak. And again, it's a learning process to be able to read it and go, okay, I see what they're doing, right? When I was a master's student, I used to cheat sometimes, and I would read the introduction and the participants and bits, and then I'd skip to the discussion because I didn't want to have to deal with the results section until my statistical know-how got a bit better, okay? We don't, unfortunately, require a statistics class on this degree plan, which is something I have disagreed with for 15 years. You should take a statistics class. However, there are many layman term statistics textbooks. Don't go to the library and get a really complicated stats book to try to help you out. Right? If you're struggling understanding the stats, there's quite a lot in our textbook, and that textbook, I know it's kind of babyish, but it is real easy to read. And they lay things out very simply for you. So there's quite a lot on statistical language in the textbook. There's some in the APA manual. As I said, you can go to any library and get a statistics textbook, but find one that's relatively low-key. Otherwise, you're going to freak yourself out even more. Okay? And for the majority of you, what you want is to be able to read the data analysis and the results section and have a little bit of understanding of that. You don't need to be able to do stats. Right? Unless you're going to go work for a pro sport team and you're their data analysis, and then you need a stats class. Okay? So, that's a little bit about quantitative methodology. If there are any questions, obviously, you can use the discussion board. That's always good if the question is generic about the information, because then everybody gets to benefit from what I say. If you have something that's much more personal, that you've got something, by all means send an email within Canvas, please. What else? I want to double check the schedule. Okay. All right. I need to just quickly review, well, I sort of reviewed the idea of the purpose statement. You need to be spending some time, which you've got an hour and a half left of class, to be digging into the library databases. If you haven't already made a decision on your purpose statement, you want to really be chugging along with that as well, because that is due the first Monday of midterm week, which is the 4th of October. Now, I don't mind if it doesn't come in on the Monday, but the purpose statement is built in to your midterm grade. So if I don't get it midterm week, it won't be in your midterm grade, which isn't the end of the world, okay? And I really need it by Friday if it's going to go in your midterm grade, because midterm grades have to be on by noon on Monday, the 11th. Okay? If you want to send me a draft of your purpose or your APA, by all means go ahead. My life is a little less insane now that the evaluations are done. So, I can be a little more reliable to try to get you some feedback on that. Next week, we don't have a formal class meeting. I will make a big blue, a BBB, I can't, it's like being in Sesame Street. I will open up a BBB video in case people have questions for me, so I will be available during class time, but we don't have a formal lecture because I want you to have that time to be A, finishing up summaries if I ever get the next lot graded, and B, we'll really use this time, right? You should be setting aside 2.5 hours. I know that's hard, but if we were sitting here in class, right? If I had the whole classroom like I used to have 15 years ago, we would be here until 6:30, 7 o'clock because you'd be on the computers doing your database searches, right? But I don't have that control anymore. So I have to rely on you being sensible and putting that time aside for yourself. Right? Because it's important. It takes time to find good research and to develop a good purpose statement. You can't just pull it out of thin air. Okay? So you owe it to yourself to take that time to do that, and so I've set that aside next week. As I said, I will be available. If anybody is on campus and you want me here in the classroom to chat about something at 4:30, let me know and I'll be here. Otherwise, I'm planning to be on the video conference. Okay? Ask as many questions as you need. The more questions you ask, the better chance there is I can say something that helps you out. Okay? I think that's it. Okay? Enjoy your research digging. Don't think of it as work, all right? Think of it as, oh, what can I find out today that's going to be fun? Okay? Because that's all it is, right? If you're not enjoying it, either you shouldn't be in grad school or you're asking the wrong question, right? You didn't find something that was of interest to you. Okay? So, keep that in mind. If it's really tedious, maybe change your topic. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. All right? Okay, Sean, I will get stuff back to that first paper back as quick as I can. Hopefully there'll be something useful there. I know a couple of people have resubmitted paper number 2 based on the feedback from number 1, so that's fine, since I'm still chugging on number 2. And then that number 3, really look at the hints that I gave you, because number 3 is very different. Okay? So, ask questions if you need to. All right?
Thank you, Dr. Wall.
No problem. No problem. Let me know, did you manage to sort out your computer, Sean? Kind of, uh-oh.
I'm actually at work right now. I just went through teaching, so
Okay.
I'm an hour behind you guys, so.
Oh, you're in California?
I'm in California, so.
Okay.
I just got out of school and the class starts here, so.
Well, that's